Page 12, NARM Policy Statement on Preceptor-Student Relationships. In validating the apprenticeship as a valuable form of education and training for midwifery, NARM appreciates the many variations in the preceptor-student relationship. In upholding the professional demeanor of midwifery, it is important that each party in the relationship strive to maintain a sense of cooperation and respect for one another. While some preceptor-student relationships develop into a professional partnership, others are brief and specifically limited to a defined role for each participant. Effective January 1st, 2017, all NARM preceptors must be registered before supervising any clinicals documented on a student's NARM application. Skills clinicals signed off after that date by a preceptor who is not registered with NARM will be invalid. To help NARM candidates achieve exceptional training and a satisfactory relationship from their apprenticeship, NARM makes the following statements. 1. All preceptors for NARM PEP applicants must be currently registered with NARM as a registered preceptor. Preceptor registration requires filling out and submitting the NARM Preceptor Registration Form 700. Forms may be found at www.narm.org/preceptors. In order to qualify as a NARM registered preceptor, the midwife must document their credential as a certified professional midwife, CPM, certified nurse midwife, CNM, certified midwife, CM, or must be a licensed practitioner legally recognized by a state jurisdiction to provide maternity care. A preceptor must have an additional 3 years of experience after credentialing or 50 primary, co-primary births beyond entry-level CPM requirements. Additionally, they must also have 10 continuity of care births beyond entry-level CPM requirements. A preceptor must have attended a minimum of 10 out-of-hospital births in the last 3 years. It is the student's responsibility to verify the preceptor's registration status by asking their preceptor or contacting NARM. 2. The clinical components of apprenticeship should include didactic and clinical experience, and the clinical component must be at least 2 years in duration. The average apprenticeship, which includes didactic and clinical training, typically lasts 3 to 5 years. In the PEP application, the dates from the earliest clinical documented in Phase 1 or 2 until the last clinical documented in Phase 3 must span at least 2 years, or the applicant should enclose a statement explaining additional clinical experiences that complete the requirement but are not charted on these forms. Additional births may also be reflected on Form 102, Birth Experience Background. 3. It is acceptable, even preferable, for the student to study under more than one registered preceptor. In the event that more than one preceptor is responsible for the training, each preceptor will sign off on those births and skills which were adequately performed under the supervision of that preceptor. Each preceptor who signs for any clinicals on Forms 111 or 112 must fill out and sign the verification of birth experience form. All numbers signed for must be equal to or greater than the numbers signed for on Forms 111A through D and 112A through E. The student should make multiple copies of all blank forms so each preceptor will have a copy to fill out and sign. These forms should be filled out and signed by the preceptor, not the applicant. 4. The preceptor and student should have a clear understanding of the responsibilities of each person to the other, including the time expected to be spent in one-on-one training, classroom or small group study, self-study, clinical observation, opportunities for demonstration of skills, time on call, and financial obligations. 5. The student, if at all possible, should have the NARM application at the beginning of the apprenticeship and should have all relevant documentation signed at the time of the experience rather than waiting until the completion of the apprenticeship. 6. Preceptors are expected to sign the application documentation for the student at the time the skill is performed competently. Determination of, quote, adequate performance, end of quote, of the skill is at the discretion of the preceptor, and multiple demonstrations of each skill may be necessary. Documentation of attendance and performance at births, prenatals, postpartums, etc. should be signed only if the preceptor agrees that expectations have been met. Any misunderstanding regarding expectations for satisfactory completion of experience or skill should be discussed and resolved as soon as possible. However, the preceptor makes the final determination. 7. The preceptor is expected to provide adequate opportunities for the student to observe clinical skills, to discuss clinical situations away from the clients, to practice clinical skills, and to perform the clinical skills in the capacity of a primary midwife, all while under the direct supervision of the preceptor. This means that the preceptor must be physically present when the student performs the midwife skills. The preceptor holds the final responsibility for the safety of the client or baby and should become involved whenever warranted in the spirit of positive education and role modeling. Preceptors who sign clinicals but refuse to complete the final verification form without a justifiable reason risk having their preceptor status revoked. If there is a concern, the clinical skill should not be signed off in the first place. 8. Preceptors who sign off on experiences they did not witness risk losing their ability to sign as a preceptor in the future, and also risk losing their NARM, Certified Professional Midwife, CPM credential. 9. NARM's definition of the initial prenatal exam includes covering an intake interview, history, medical, gynecological, family, and a physical exam. These exams do not have to occur all on the first visit to the midwife, but the student should perform at least 20 of these exams on one or more early prenatal visits. 10. Prenatal exams, newborn exams, and postpartum exams as assistant under supervision, Forms 111B through D, must be completed before the same category of clinicals may be verified as primary under supervision, Forms 112B through E. However, prenatals, newborn exams, and postpartum exams as a primary under supervision may begin before the primary under supervision births occur. 11. Births as assistant under supervision, Form 111, are births where the student is being taught to perform the skills of a midwife. Just observing a birth is not considered assistant under supervision. Charting or other skills, providing labor and birth support, and participating in management discussions may all be done as an assistant in increasing degrees of responsibility. The student should perform some skills at every birth listed on Form 111A and must be present throughout labor, birth, and the immediate postpartum period. The student must complete 18 of the assistant under supervision births before functioning as primary under supervision at births. 12. Births as a primary midwife under supervision, Form 112, means that the student demonstrates the ability to perform all aspects of midwifery care to the satisfaction of the preceptor who is physically present and supervising the student's performance of skills and decision-making. 13. Catching the baby is a skill that should be taught and performed during the assistant under supervision phase. The primary under supervision births require that the student be responsible but under supervision for all skills needed for labor support and monitoring of mother and baby, risk assessment, the delivery of the infant, newborn exam, and the immediate postpartum assessment of mother and baby. If the mother or father is, quote-unquote, catching the baby, the primary under supervision is responsible for all elements of the delivery. If the preceptor catches the baby, then that birth qualifies as assistant under supervision for the student. 14. The preceptor holds final responsibility for all prenatal care, the birth, and postpartum care done by the student. This applies to all phases, including Phase 4, that only requires births. 15. Attendance at a birth where either the student or preceptor is also the client will not be accepted for verification of the required clinicals. Guidelines for verifying documentation of clinical experience, page 14. In response to multiple requests for clarification about the role of the preceptor in the NARM application certification process, NARM has developed the following step-by-step guidelines based on the instructions set forth in the Candidate Information Booklet. These guidelines are suggestions for successful completion of the application documentation. 1. The preceptor and applicant together should A. Review practice documents required by NARM, practice guidelines, emergency care form, informed disclosure, given at initiation of care, and informed consent documents used for shared decision-making during care. B. Review all client charts or clinical verification forms from a MEEC accredited, pre-accredited program referenced on the NARM application and confirm that the preceptor and applicant names appear on each chart form that is being referenced. C. Confirm that the signatures, initials of the applicant are on every chart form for initial exam, history, and physical exam, complete prenatal exams, labor, birth, and immediate postpartum exam, newborn exam, and complete follow-up postpartum exams listed on the NARM application. Be sure the numbers written on the application forms are the same number of signatures, initials on the charts forms. D. Check all birth dates and dates of all exams for accuracy. E. Check all codes to make sure there are no duplicate code numbers. Each client must have a unique code. If there is more than one birth, including twins, with any given client, there must be a different code assigned for each subsequent birth. 2. If a preceptor has more than one student applicant, each chart must have a code that all students will use. Students should not develop different codes for the same client. 3. Preceptors need to be sure their forms show that the student participated as primary under supervision and that the preceptor was present in the room for all items the preceptor signs. For example, the arrival and departure times at the birth should be documented on the chart for both the applicant and the preceptor. At the time of clinical experience, preceptors and students should initial each visit. 4. Applicants must have access to or copies of any charts with code number listed in the application in case of audit. The informed disclosure consent documents used by the student should not indicate they are a CPM, even if they are in the application process. The CPM designation may not be used until the certificate has been awarded. Preceptors who sign off on experiences they did not witness risk losing their ability to sign as a preceptor in the future and also risk losing their NARM certification. NARM's transfer policy for registered preceptors and students, page 15. NARM defines a transport as, quote, transfer of care during labor to another primary caregiver prior to the birth of the baby. In the case of transfer, the student must remain with the client through the birth, if possible, and continue to be present through the immediate postpartum period. The supervising preceptor must be present until transfer of care has occurred, end of quote. Learning opportunities. Transfer of care is an important skill. NARM registered preceptors should help students learn how to transfer clients in accordance with the Home Birth Consensus Summit guidelines, including notifying the receiving provider or hospital of the incoming transfer, reason for transfer, brief relevant clinical history, planned mode of transport, and expected time of arrival, providing routine or urgent care en route in coordination with any emergency services personnel, and addressing the psychosocial needs of the woman during the change of birth setting, Upon arrival, providing a verbal report including details on current health status and need for care, providing a legible copy of relevant prenatal and labor medical records, providing good communication by ensuring that the woman understands the hospital provider's plan of care and the hospital provider understands the woman's need for information regarding care options. If the woman chooses, remaining to provide continuity and support. NARM strongly encourages preceptors to remain present through the immediate postpartum period. However, it is understood that the student no longer requires preceptor supervision once transfer of care is complete. Hospital transfers are a valuable learning experience for student midwives. Remaining as support for a client who is transferred to the hospital provides continuity of care for the client, an opportunity for the student to assume an independent primary support role in the hospital setting, and can foster understanding and collegial relationships between the midwifery and medical community. The NARM registered preceptor should, as part of their emergency care plan, disclose to clients their practice's policy regarding student participation during hospital transfers. If the preceptors in the practice generally do not remain when transfer of care is complete, choosing instead to leave the student to continue to provide support for the client, this should be disclosed to the client in the emergency care plan. The client should ideally be supported throughout labor, birth, and immediate postpartum, regardless of whether the baby is born by vaginal or cesarean birth. Often, the midwife is unable to attend the client in the operating room, but the midwife's presence in the recovery or postpartum unit can be beneficial as the client establishes breastfeeding after a challenging birth. Midwives and students are encouraged to remain to provide support as needed. Documentation of transports in the NARM CPM application. NARM registered preceptors should clearly state in their student contract what their expectations are for student involvement during hospital transport situations. If the preceptor expects the student to remain with the client at the hospital after the preceptor leaves, this expectation should be documented in writing and signed by both the student and the preceptor. 2 planned hospital births need to be submitted in Phase 1. These can be antepartum referrals. No more than 4 of the Phase 2 births documented may be a transport. No more than 2 of the Phase 3 births documented may be a transport. No more than 1 of the births documented in Phase 4 may be a transport. Transports are not accepted for continuity of care births. For the purposes of the NARM application, primary under supervision care must be provided for a minimum of 5 prenatal visits spanning at least 2 trimesters, the birth, including the placenta, the newborn exam, and at least 2 postpartum visits. Quarterly Student Preceptor Evaluation Form, suggested format, page 16. This form is to facilitate communication between the student and preceptor and is not submitted to NARM. Student's name, preceptor's name. Time period covered by this evaluation. Observed births, number attended, and number initialed on NARM forms. This will repeat. Number attended and number initialed on NARM forms for every clinical experience. Observed births. Prenatals as assistant. Initial exams as assistant. Newborn exams as assistant. Postpartum exams as assistant. Births as assistant. Prenatal exams as primary. Initial exams as primary. Newborn exams as primary. Postpartum exams as primary. Births as primary. Continuity of care births. Primary births with at least 1 prenatal. All clinicals attended may not necessarily be initialed on NARM forms. It is at the discretion of the preceptor whether the student is acting in the capacity needed to count the clinical as an assistant or primary. More than the minimum number of clinicals in each category may be needed in order to progress to the next phase. For example, More berths as an assistant may be needed before the preceptor determines the student is ready to be primary. Some berths where the student is expected to be primary may not count in that category if the preceptor believes the role has not been adequately fulfilled. In order to progress through the NARM phases of training, the student and preceptor must have a good, mutually agreed on assessment of the progress. The best way to attain mutual agreement is to meet at least quarterly and discuss the progress being made toward mutual goals. Questions for discussion, page 17. Is the student provided with an opportunity to progress in levels of skills and responsibilities? If not, what is the impediment? Is the student progressing through the assist clinicals in increasing levels of responsibility so that upon meeting the minimum numbers, they are prepared to move toward primaries? Do the student and preceptor meet outside of clinical time to discuss progress and evaluate performance and knowledge? Has this been adequate for meeting the expectations of both? Is the student demonstrating adequate self-study skills and application of new knowledge in the clinical setting? How can this be improved? Is the student meeting the preceptor's expectations? If not, what specifically is not being met? Audits. All NARM applications are evaluated in detail and randomly audited. If the application is audited, copies of practice guidelines, emergency care form, informed disclosure given at initiation of care, and one example of informed consent documents used for shared decision-making during care, and specific charts with the names whited out must be submitted to the NARM Applications Office. MEEC applicants may submit client charts or clinical verification forms from a MEEC pre-accredited program for purposes of audit. Charts that include client names, addresses, and or phone numbers will be immediately shredded and replacements requested. Applicants are responsible for having immediate access to client charts or clinical verification forms from a MEEC pre-accredited program when they submit their application. Audited materials are due within 2 weeks of request. Delays in return of audit materials can hold up test scheduling. For information about preceptor responsibilities, please see the NARM policy statement on preceptor-student relationships in this booklet, in the application, or on the web page. These guidelines are suggestions for successful completion of the requirements. Time frame for certification process, page 18. NARM reserves the right to return any incomplete applications. All fees are non-refundable. A resubmission fee will be charged at the time of resubmission. Candidates with applications requiring corrected materials or additional items must submit required items within 2 weeks of notification. If required materials are not returned within 2 weeks, the application may be returned as incomplete. If a candidate is unable to submit the required materials within 2 weeks, they may submit a written request for an extension. Extensions are reviewed on a case-by-case basis and approved or denied at the discretion of the applications department. If granted, extensions may only be granted for up to a maximum of 2 months. If the extension deadline is not met, the application will be returned as incomplete. Upon submission of the CPM application and fees, the applicant will receive notification of eligibility for the NARM examination. The applicant must sit for the written examination within 1 year of receipt of the intent form. If any of these deadlines cannot be met, the applicant may request a 6-month extension from the NARM test department. Phase 4 must be submitted within 6 months of passing the NARM examination. If the deadlines and extensions pass without a documented effort on the part of the applicant to complete the certification process, the application will be considered expired, closed, and the applicant must reapply. An applicant must complete all required work within the timetable listed below, including written extensions. An applicant whose application has expired will forfeit all fees. Candidates should keep copies of all application materials submitted. If the candidate needs to have expired application materials returned and the application has not yet been destroyed by NARM applications, a $100 fee will be required. Requests for extensions must be received in writing by the deadline listed. Every effort will be made by NARM to notify applicants of approaching expiration deadlines, but NARM cannot be responsible for notifying candidates who have moved or who do not receive mail at the address listed on the application. The responsibility for meeting deadlines and/or requesting extensions is the candidate's. If unusual circumstances prevent an applicant from meeting these deadlines, NARM will consider further extensions on an individual basis if submitted in writing prior to the deadline. NARM recommends continued supervised practice throughout the application and testing process. Application process timetable. Process: written examination, all applicants. 6 months blank, 1 year expired, 18 months blank. Phase 4, due within 6 months of passing the NARM examination. 6 months request extension, 1 year request extension, 18 months expired. Application will be archived. Applicant must reapply. 1. Application 1 for expired. Application will be archived. Applicant must reapply and resubmit all fees. PEP application phases 1 through 3 should be submitted 4 months prior to anticipated testing date for the NARM examination to allow for processing. Applicants through other routes should be submitted at least 2 months prior to anticipated testing date. Retakes. Candidates who have failed the written examination are expected to complete the certification process within the timeframes listed above. There is no limit to the number of times a candidate may take the written examination, but the candidate will be charged. If multiple retakes are required, the candidate may not be able to complete certification within the expected time frame. If a candidate does not complete the certification process within 3 years of when the application was received by the NARM Applications Department, documentation of continued supervised clinical practice will be required. The candidate must submit documentation of 10 supervised births that have occurred within 3 years of submitting the next retake form. Form is available upon request. Continuing on page 19, the demonstration of knowledge and skills. Identification of the knowledge and skills necessary for certification is based on the actual practice of midwifery and not on a specific set of protocols or regulations. The knowledge tested on the written examination and the skills tested verified by registered preceptors are identified from the job analysis. The job analysis is a survey of the current practice of midwives across the country. From this list comes the test specifications for each examination. Many midwifery schools base their curriculum on these test specifications so that their graduates will be prepared for the certification examinations. The skills checklist portion of the portfolio evaluation process is also based on this list, so midwives training through a preceptor will also learn and demonstrate the same skills. This process assures that all CPMs, regardless of path of education or experience, will demonstrate competency in the same skills. NARM does not specify how a CPM will utilize the knowledge and skills in actual practice. In other words, NARM does not issue standardized practice protocols. NARM does require that each CPM candidate have practice protocols in writing and utilize informed consent in communicating the protocols to the clients. The legal regulation of midwives varies in each state. Midwives practice completely unregulated in many states, and in other states they practice according to very specific protocols set by the state. In some states they are permitted to use emergency medications or suture tears or give oxygen. In other states they may be forbidden from any of these procedures. The CPM credential verifies the midwife knows these skills whether or not they choose or are allowed to perform them. States that require the CPM credential for licensure are assured that every CPM has been through a rigorous process to verify knowledge and skills. The CPM is the standard for the knowledge and skills, regardless of the individual circumstances in which the CPM practices. CPM candidates sometimes comment on the written examination questions that they are not allowed to make that choice based on their state regulations. NARM does not say that the midwife must base protocols on that knowledge or include that skill in practice, but must demonstrate the knowledge or skill for purposes of national certification. NARM questions are based on the test specifications and are referenced to the bibliography listed in the Candidate Information Booklet. Candidates should base their answers on the NARM examination as well as the skills required in the CPM application on the test specifications in the CIB and not on specific individual or state protocols. Passing the NARM examination depends on receiving a minimum number of correct answers. Leaving a question blank will affect the total score. Each question on the written examination is worth 1 point. Failing candidates must pay an additional fee to retake either examination. The NARM examination, page 20. Candidates must submit the General Application Form 100, the CPM application form, or PEP phases 1 through 3, and one of the following forms of documentation: a letter sent from the MEEC accredited, pre-accredited program confirming graduation or verifying all requirements, with the exception of passing the NARM examination, have been met for graduation, a notarized copy of diploma, or a notarized copy of the final transcript with the school insignia indicating graduation from a MEEC accredited, pre-accredited program, copy of current AMCB, CNM/CM certificate or wallet card, copy of current state endorsement process, i.e. certification, licensure, registration, or documentation indicating legal recognition in states previously evaluated for educational equivalency, letter of completion of phases 1 through 3 of NARM's portfolio evaluation process. Upon eligibility for testing, candidates will receive instructions for registering for the NARM examination. Candidates will be contacted by NARM's testing company to schedule their testing date at one of the approved testing centers. Candidates will receive a written examination admission letter from the testing company, which will include the date, time, and location of their scheduled written examination and directions to the test site. The test results letter will be sent as an email from NARM's testing company within 3 business days of completing the exam. Inclement weather policy. Inclement weather includes snow, ice, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, etc. This policy also applies to any unplanned event that causes the test site to close, such as a loss of electricity or terrorism alert. Should a test site be closed for any reason, rescheduling will be between the candidate and the testing company. Candidates who are taking the NARM examination for state recognition. Many states use the NARM examination as part of their process for state recognition. In these states, midwives who are already CPMs may have a simplified route to legal recognition. Midwives who are not yet CPMs must meet the licensure criteria for the specific state and will register for the NARM examination through their state agency. After passing the NARM examination and receiving state licensure, the midwife may apply for CPM certification through the, quote, midwives from state countries with legal recognition, end of quote, category, if their state / country is listed. If the candidate is from a state with legal recognition planning to take the NARM examination through the state agency, the following information applies. The state agency will determine which candidates are eligible to take the NARM examination. All documentation for eligibility is processed through the state agency. When the candidate has met the eligibility requirements, they will receive a packet of information from the state agency, which will include A, the Candidate Information Booklet, the study outline, test specifications, and reference list. B, the candidate application form to register for the NARM examination. 2, the candidate must send the application form and appropriate fee as instructed by the agency. Some states collect the applications and the fees, and other states ask the candidate to send the application and fee directly to NARM. If the fee is sent directly to NARM, it must be in the form of a money order, certified check, or credit card. Personal checks are not accepted. All fees must be paid in U.S. funds. A handling fee of approximately 8% will be added to all credit card transactions. All fees are non-refundable. 3, to verify registration for the examination through the agency, please contact the state agency. In the cases where the applications and fees have been sent directly to NARM, NARM will notify the state agency of those who have registered for the examination. In either case, verification is done through the state agency. The examination is given in 2 parts with 3 hours allotted for each part. 5, the agency will notify NARM of the candidates who have established eligibility through the state. NARM will send an intent form to each candidate describing the process and the fees. When NARM has received the testing fee, the candidate's name will be entered into the registration database. NARM's testing company will contact the candidate about registering for the exam on the date and site of their choosing. NARM's testing company will send an admission letter to each candidate with the date, time, and location of the exam. The candidate will usually receive their test results by email from NARM's testing company within 7 business days. NARM will notify the state agency of the test results for each candidate who has registered through their process. Candidates who are taking the NARM examination to become a CPM, sequence of application and testing procedures. For educational validation, 1, download or order the NARM application. 2, 1 photo will be needed. This should be a head and shoulders photo similar to a passport photo. The photo is submitted with the application. 3, submit the appropriate application materials with the required fee to the NARM Applications Department. All candidates should fill out General Form 100 and the specific pages for their route of entry. Notification will be sent when the application materials have been received. For CPM certification, page 22. 5, all candidates should submit the CPM application along with verification of education, PEP certificate, MEEC diploma, transcript, or letter of intent of completion from the administrator of the program, AMCB certification, or state license, along with the certification fee. The application, documentation, and fee should be sent to the NARM Applications Department. 6, when the CPM application is approved, the applicant will receive information for registering for the exam. 7, NARM will send official notification of test results and any remaining requirements for certification within 3 weeks of testing. Candidates are responsible for sending NARM any address changes. 8, the CPM certification will be issued after all requirements have been met. Please send the application and intent forms to the appropriate NARM address. Failure to do so may result in a delay of the application or the examinations. For questions, contact NARM Applications at applications@narm.org or NARM Testing at testing@narm.org. All applications are subject to audit. NARM is not responsible for any delay in NARM's processing of the application or for delay in receipt of the application, including but not limited to mail delays, inclement weather, acts of God, acts of terrorism, any individual's or entity's mistake or omission, special testing needs. The NARM Certified Professional Midwife CPM certification program, in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, provides testing accommodations for candidates with disabilities. These accommodations are made at no cost to the candidate. Requests for special testing accommodations must be made in writing to the NARM's test department at the time of application and must contain the following information. 1, a letter from the candidate describing the requested accommodation and A. Documentation of a history of special accommodations for testing, such as letters from schools or testing agencies administering standardized tests, indicating the accommodations granted. Or B. A report from an appropriate licensed or certified healthcare professional who has made an assessment of the candidate's disability. The report must describe the test and other assessment techniques used to evaluate the candidate, provide test results, indicate the test results that were out of normal range, and contain conclusions and recommendations for special accommodations based on those findings. These documents must be submitted with the application to the NARM test department at the time of application with the written examination intent form. Although every effort will be made to arrange for the accommodation at the candidate's choice of test sites, this cannot be guaranteed. The candidate may be asked to choose an alternate test site or date based on the ability of the test department to arrange special accommodations. The NARM examination is given by computer at approved computer testing labs. If a candidate cannot take an exam by computer for cultural or religious reasons, NARM will make every effort to provide a paper exam at a site convenient to the candidate, but all testing centers may not be able to accommodate this request. The request for paper testing should be made in writing at the time the application is submitted, along with a description of the reason computer testing is not allowed. Examination site conduct, non-disclosure, test security. Page 23. The examination administrator is NARM's designated agent in maintaining a secure and valid examination administration. Any individual found by NARM to have engaged in conduct which compromises or attempts to compromise the integrity of the examination process will be subject to legal action as sanctioned by NARM. Any individual found cheating on any portion of the examinations will have their scores withheld or declared invalid, and their certification may be denied or revoked. Conduct that compromises or attempts to compromise the examination process includes removal of any examination materials from the examination room, reproducing or reconstructing any portion of the NARM examinations, aiding by any means in the reproduction or reconstruction of any portion of the NARM examination, selling, distributing, buying, receiving, or having unauthorized possession of any portion of the NARM examinations, disclosure of any kind or manner of the NARM examination, possession of any book, notes, written or printed materials, or data of any kind other than those examination materials distributed by the examination administrator during the examination administration. Conduct that violates the examination process, such as falsifying or misrepresenting education credentials or prerequisite experience required to qualify for CPM certification, impersonating a candidate, or having an impersonator take the NARM examination. Any violation of conduct as listed above will be documented in writing by the examination administrator and will be presented to NARM for consideration and action. Additionally, to protect the validity and defensibility of the examination process for all candidates, each candidate will be required to sign an affidavit of non-disclosure prior to taking any portion of the NARM examination. Computer-based testing considerations. Computer-based testing is provided as a convenience to candidates to afford them the opportunity to test on almost any day of the year and at many locations across the country. However, computer-based testing also means that computer-related problems can occur. The most common are delays in beginning the examination due to technical problems. That was one. This is A. The NARM examination appointment schedule includes time for check-in and setup at the test site. Candidates may not begin the examination until all check-in and technical processes involved in the test administration have been completed. This process can on occasion take as long as 30 to 60 minutes. B. The time portion of the test administration, the timed period during which candidates actually see and respond to examination questions, is not affected by the amount of time needed for check-in and setup. Test results, including start time and completion time, are submitted electronically to NARM'S testing company. In the unlikely event of a delay long enough to prevent completion of the examination in a single day, a complaint may be submitted to NARM'S testing company for an adjustment in the examination retake requirements. C. A delay in the start of an examination that could have been or was completed the same day is not a basis for an appeal of test results or an adjustment in the examination retake process. D. If there is any situation during testing that causes concern, it is the candidate's responsibility to bring it to the attention of the proctor at the time and ask that NARM'S testing company be contacted immediately. 2. Cancellation or invalidation of the exam score. A test score can be canceled if A. There has been a violation of NARM policies, B. Information submitted by the candidate is inaccurate or has been falsified, C. There is evidence suggesting that the test score may not represent a fair or valid assessment of a candidate's knowledge. This could happen for any of several reasons, including suspected cheating, violation of test center rules, software or equipment malfunction during the test administration, etc. If NARM determines that a computer malfunction produced an invalid score, the candidate may be asked to retake the exam at no charge. 3. If a candidate is using live remote proctoring for taking the exam, the computer must sync adequately with the testing company technology. The time allowed for testing includes time that is needed for registration, identity verification, and the syncing of the technology. It is also possible for the internet connection to require a reboot or resync during the testing period. The proctor or testing company personnel will walk the candidate through the process. Difficulties with technology may delay the time actually spent answering questions, but the time allowed is generous and should not prevent the candidate from completing the exam. Delays caused by technology do not invalidate the final score. A failing score will require a retest. Candidates' written examination scores. All candidate scores will be reported as pass or fail based on the cut score derived using a reverse Angoff method. All candidates will receive notification of their preliminary scores by email from NARM'S testing company within about 7 business days. Passing candidates will not receive a breakdown of their scores. Candidates who fail the exam will receive a more detailed report which highlights their performance on major areas of the examination. Official scores will usually be reported by NARM within 2 to 3 weeks of the examination date. In cases where candidates apply through a licensing agency, the official examination results will also be sent directly to the agency. In cases where candidates apply through a MEEC accredited, pre-accredited program, the official examination results will also be sent directly to the program. Examination scores will not be given to any candidate over the phone. No credit is given for items with more than one response selected. All questions should be answered. There is no extra penalty for wrong answers. Rescheduling a NARM examination, page 25. Candidates who have scheduled their NARM examination date may cancel with no penalty if the NARM testing company is notified at least 30 days prior to the testing date. Candidates who cancel or reschedule with 5 to 29 days notice must pay a $50 reschedule fee. Candidates who reschedule or cancel within 5 days or who do not show up at their testing site must pay a $200 reschedule fee. Retesting for failing candidates. If a CPM candidate fails the NARM examination, they will receive a retake intent form from the test department. The candidate will be allowed to reschedule a retest upon payment of a retake fee as outlined in the fee schedule. Failing candidates will not be retested using the same form of the examination they were given initially. However, they may be assigned the same examination administrator. Candidates must wait 2 months before retaking the NARM examination and must take the examination again within 6 months after the 2-month waiting period. Candidates' right to appeal eligibility requirements. A candidate who does not meet requirements for certification will be informed in writing. The candidate will have an opportunity to provide the missing information or to write a letter of appeal. All appeals must be received in writing within 2 months of denial and will be processed according to policy. Candidates' right to appeal. Comments on examination content. Candidates will be allowed to make comments about questions on the computer during the exam administration. The comments do not affect the score, but may provide guidance on revising or replacing questions for the next form of the examination. There is a comment button next to each question. Please note that there is limited time to take the examination, and adding comments will not extend that time limit. Comments may also be submitted by mail to the NARM test department. Comments submitted by mail must be postmarked no later than 7 days after the test date to be considered as part of the appeals process. NARM will carefully consider all comments. Appeals. A candidate with a complaint about the certification process or examination may write a letter to NARM test department. Letters appealing the content of the written examination must include or reference previously submitted examination comments as defined above. All appeals must be submitted in writing and postmarked within 7 days of the exam date. A written response will be provided only if the candidate has requested a response and has specifically proposed content, examination, or process changes. Examination comment form. NARM encourages all candidates to submit comments on the NARM examination process at the time of their examination. Comments may be made on the computer during the exam administration. NARM will not provide a written response to the comments unless a letter of appeal is written in addition to the comment form. See Candidate's Right to Appeal. Suspension or revocation of application. The NARM Certified Professional Midwife application process may be suspended or terminated for any of the following reasons. If an applicant is found guilty of dishonesty, refusal to inform, negligent or fraudulent action in which the midwife compromised the well-being of a client or a client's baby, compromising or attempting to compromise the integrity of the examination process, cheating on any portion of the examinations, falsification of application information. The NARM board, in consultation with their testing company and legal consultant, will set criteria for possible reapplication. NARM's policy on use of the CPM credential. Midwives may not refer to themselves or knowingly permit anyone else to refer to them as a CPM, Certified Professional Midwife, or NARM certified or accredited, unless they have formally received the CPM credential and their status is active. Midwives who are in the process of applying for the credential or who have allowed the credential to expire or taken inactive status or had their credential revoked may not refer to themselves as a CPM or a certified professional midwife or as certified by NARM. Midwives whose CPM certification has expired may not refer to themselves as a retired CPM unless they have been granted the status of CPM retired by NARM. Midwives in the process of applying for certification may not refer to themselves in any context as a CPM candidate or applicant because there is no such status granted by NARM. Regardless of enrollment in an educational program, a student may not use the title Student CPM. Being a candidate, applicant, or student does not verify meeting the certification requirements until the certificate is granted. If NARM becomes aware that a midwife who is not a CPM has printed or published material referring to herself in the above capacity or has misled the public through any means, a warning letter will be sent with instructions to remove the misinformation from any materials. If the correction is not made, notice will be sent to NARM's legal counsel for further action. Acceptable language for students can be, quote, ... is in training to become a CPM, end of quote. And for those with expired certification, quote, ... previously certified as a CPM, end of quote. as a description of previous or intended certification, but not as a title. Revocation of certification, page 27. The NARM Certified Professional Midwife credential may be revoked for the following reasons: falsification of application information, failure to participate in the complaint review, grievance mechanism, or to abide by the conditions set as a result of the grievance mechanism, infractions of the non-disclosure policy which threaten the security of the NARM examinations, if the grievance mechanism determines that the CPM acted with dishonesty, did not use appropriate informed consent with the client, or that negligent or fraudulent actions compromise the well-being of a client or client's baby, the CPM credential must be revoked. Midwives with revoked certificates may reapply for certification after 2 years. Prior to recertification, all outstanding complaints must be resolved, including completion of previous grievance mechanism requirements. Recertification. Certification renewal is due every 3 years. Recertification forms are sent with the initial certification and with each recertification, and are also available on the NARM website at www.narm.org. 30 continuing education contact hours, 3.0 CEUs, are required during the 3-year period. 1 contact hour is defined as 55 clock minutes of time, to be awarded 0.5 half contact hours. The time period is 30 minutes to 55 minutes. Less than 30 contact minutes will not be awarded continuing education contact hours. All recertifications are subject to audit. Mandatory areas. A. Peer review, 5 contact hours. Participates in peer review and/or attends peer review workshop. B. Current CPR and neonatal resuscitation. NARM only accepts certification from courses which include a hands-on skills component. Online-only courses are not accepted. Approved CPR courses include the American Heart Association, the Red Cross, and American Safety and Health Institute, ASHI, Basic Life Support. Neonatal resuscitation courses must be approved by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Canadian Pediatric Society, or pre-approved by NARM. Courses must be approved for use in the U.S. or Canada. C. Affirmation of current use of practice guidelines. Emergency care form, informed disclosure given at initiation of care, and informed consent documents used for shared decision-making during care. D. Documentation of workshop, course, or module on cultural awareness within the last 3 years. E. Demographic information. 2 options for recertification, page 28. 1. Mandatory areas plus 25 contact hours from a mixture of categories. 2. Mandatory areas plus retaking the NARM examination. Continuing education categories. Category 1. Maximum 25 contact hours. CEUs must have been granted by an accrediting organization such as MEEC, ICEA, Lamaze International, ACOG, ACNM, AWHON, state health departments, nursing or perinatal associations, etc. Any class or coursework that is granted accredited CEUs in a health profession related to midwifery, women's health, or the evaluation and care of the newborn. Category 2, maximum 10 contact hours. Coursework or classes in midwifery, women's health, or the evaluation and care of the newborn without accredited CEUs. Category 3, maximum 15 contact hours. Part 1, research and writing related to the field of midwifery, women's health, or the evaluation and care of the newborn. Part 2, teaching related to the field of midwifery, women's health, or the evaluation and care of the newborn. Category 4, maximum 5 contact hours. Self-study or life experience related to the field of midwifery, women's health, or the evaluation and care of the newborn. 1 contact hour equals 1 contact hour. Category 5, maximum 15, limit 5 contact hours per section, serving in a volunteer capacity. Category 6, maximum 10 contact hours, filing statistics forms with the MANA Division of Research, 1 contact hour for every 10 MANA statistics forms. Category 7, maximum 10 contact hours, service in an out-of-country OOC maternity center or clinic, NARM policy on recertification and inactive status. CPMs who wish to go on inactive status must declare inactive status within 90 days of expiration date, submit $35 each year to continue inactive status. Midwives who are listed as inactive will receive all NARM communications, are bound to all policies regarding peer review and the grievance mechanism, may not identify themselves as a CPM. Within page 29, within the 6-year period of inactivity, the CPM may become recertified at any time by paying the recertification fee and submitting the recertification application and requirements for 1 recertification cycle, 30 contact hours, including 5 hours of peer review for many of the categories defined in the recertification application. After 6 years of inactive status, the certification status will automatically become expired. The CPM's name will not be given to prospective clients. Inquiries about the status of a midwife will be answered that the CPM has been certified but is currently inactive. Expired CPMs. A CPM will be considered expired if they are more than 90 days past recertification deadline without declaring inactive status, or at the end of 6 years of inactive status. Recertification after expired status. Should an expired CPM decide to reactivate certification, they will be required to submit evidence of the following on recertification after expiration, Form 610. Attendance at 5 births within 5 years of reapplication. 30 contact hours in the last 3 years, including 5 hours of peer review as defined in the reactivation packet. Current CPR and NRP. Once the recertification after expiration Form 610 is completed, please submit it along with the reactivation fee. Includes examination as instructed on the form. To reactivate from an expired status, the midwife will be required to retake the NARM examination or submit a copy of their current state midwifery license or AMCB certification. The NARM examination will be scheduled after the recertification after expiration Form 610 is approved. CPM retired. Retirement status may be granted to any CPM who applies, provided that they meet at least one of the following conditions: no longer practicing and have held the CPM credential for at least 9 years, over the age of 60, or medical reasons such as illness or disability. Application for retirement status is a one-time only requirement. To apply for retirement status, the CPM should submit a completed NARM retirement status form 630 along with associated fees. Retired CPMs may use the CPM retired title, will receive a certificate which recognizes the CPM as retired, will be listed in the NARM database records as retired versus expired, will receive any future mailings from NARM, such as e-blasts and newsletters. Retired CPMs may not use the title of CPM without retired status designation, practice midwifery using the CPM credential certification, act as a NARM registered preceptor. Fee schedule. Fees are to be payable to NARM in U.S. funds by money order, certified check, or credit card. Personal checks are not accepted. A handling fee of approximately 8% will be added to all credit card transactions. Fees listed below in parentheses are for payment with a credit card. Credit card payment should be made through our secure billing site. at narm.org/billing. All fees are non-refundable. Application fees. Application type. PEP entry level application fees. Phase 1, $225 in parentheses $243. Phase 2, $425 parentheses $459. Phase 3, $425 $459. Phase 4, $125 $135. Examination fee, $1,100 $1,188. MEEK graduate, $1,300 $1,404. Examination fee included in application fee. State licensed midwife, $50. Application fees, $50 $54 in parentheses. Examination fee, $1,100 $1,188 if applicable. 2. UK licensed midwife, $1,150 $1,242 in parentheses included in application fee. CNM CM, $1,200 $1,296 in parentheses included in application fee. 1. PEP applicants who qualify for the written examination will be notified. This one goes along with the examination fee for PEP entry level. PEP applicants who qualify for the written examination will be notified by the NARM Applications Department. The examination fee should be submitted after receiving instructions from the NARM Applications Department. 2. The examination fee applies only to state licensed midwives who have not previously taken the NARM examination for licensure. Additional NARM fees. Item: resubmission fee for applications returned by NARM, $100. For money order or certified check is going to be the first price, and credit card will be the second. Resubmission fee for applications returned by NARM, $100, $108. Retake fee, NARM examination, $550, $594. NARM reexamination rescheduling fee between 5 and 29 days, $50, $54. NARM examination rescheduling fee within 5 days, $200, $216. Recertification fee before expiration, $200, $216. Recertification fee within 90 days after expiration, $250, $270. Extension fee delayed response for requested information, $50, $54. Inactive fee per year, $35, $38. Inactive status postmarked within 90 days of expiration, $50, $54. Recertification after expired status, $750, $810. Recertification after expiration, state license current, $250, $270. Retirement fee, $65, $70. NARM registered preceptor certificate, $20, $22. Additional CPM certificate and wallet card, $30, $32. Additional CPM certificate, $20, $22. Additional CPM wallet card, $20, $22. Application copy, no supporting documents, $50, $54.